The oak-paneled courtroom was so silent I could hear my own pulse. My parents sat across from me, their lawyer smirking like the verdict was already signed. My mother's arms were folded, chin raised in that same look she'd given me since childhood. The look that said, "You'll never measure up." My father avoided my eyes, but I caught the twitch of satisfaction at the corner of his mouth. In front of everyone, relatives, reporters, strangers, they were trying to take it all. The millions Grandma had left me, the last gift of love she'd ever give. My parents believed it belonged to them. After all, they'd whispered for years that I was nothing without their name, their approval. And now, they were ready to strip me bare in front of the world. The judge's gavel struck once, the sound like a coffin closing. My parents leaned back, smug, certain they'd won. But as I stood, papers trembling in my hand, I caught my reflection in the polished wood. Not a victim, not anymore. They thought this would break me, but they had no idea what was coming. Long before the courtroom, my life was quieter. I wasn't the type to chase attention. I worked hard, kept my head down, and tried to avoid the storms that seemed to follow my family. We lived in a neighborhood where appearances mattered more than truths. Lawns were clipped sharp as carpets, and neighbors whispered through fences like it was sport. My parents thrived in that environment. They liked to be seen as the perfect couple with the perfect life, hosting dinners, bragging about vacations, never missing a chance to remind people of their sacrifices. But behind closed doors, the truth was darker. My parents had a way of making love conditional. Affection was a currency, and you had to earn it by bending to their will. My older brother, charming, reckless, and always in trouble, never had to pay. To them, he was golden, no matter how many times he failed. I, on the other hand, could win awards, earn scholarships, keep steady work, and it would never be enough. The only one who saw me differently was Grandma. Her house smelled of cedar wood and old books, sunlight slipping across lace curtains. Where my parents measured worth in money and control, she measured it in kindness, patience, and quiet resilience. She was the one who taught me to cook simple meals, to save pennies in a chipped ceramic piggy bank, to write thank you letters even when no one expected them. That piggy bank, white porcelain with faded pink roses, sat on her mantel for years. She used to tap it with her knuckles and say, "This isn't just about money. It's about proof. Proof that small things add up. I didn't know it then, but those words would become my anchor." Still, the tension between Grandma and my parents was always palpable. At family gatherings, she'd praise me for something, my grades, my work ethic, the way I helped her with chores, and I'd see my mother's smile tighten. My father would clear his throat, change the subject, or raise a glass too high just to drown her out. Then came the first sting. It was a summer barbecue, neighbors packed into our backyard, laughter ringing under string lights. I had spent hours helping set the table, carrying trays, keeping things moving. But when it came time to give a toast, my mother lifted her glass and said, "To our son, our pride, our joy, the one who carries this family's legacy." Everyone clapped. My brother smirked, already half drunk, his arms slung around some girl I'd never seen before. I just stood there, plate in my hand, invisible. Grandma was the only one who noticed. She touched my shoulder gently, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "Don't let them define your worth. They don't even see the half of you." I nodded, swallowing the ache in my chest, pretending her words didn't mean everything, but deep down, I knew they were foreshadowing something bigger. My parents weren't just dismissive. They were laying the groundwork for a battle I didn't even know was coming. And Grandma, in her quiet, stubborn way, was preparing me for it. Because years later, when she passed, she left behind more than memories. She left proof. Proof of where her faith had always been. Proof that would shake the foundation of everything my parents thought belonged to them. And the day they discovered it was the day this story truly began. They thought I was still the quiet one, the overlooked one. but they were about to learn what silence can build. The day of the will reading was supposed to be solemn. Instead, it felt like a stage play. We all sat in the lawyer's office, the smell of leather-bound books and lemon polish heavy in the air. My parents wore black, though it looked more like a costume than grief. My brother leaned back in his chair, sunglasses still on indoors, clearly hungover. And me? I just sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, a knot tightening in my chest. Grandma's lawyer cleared his throat. His voice was steady as he read the formal words that shifted the ground beneath us. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield leaves her estate, liquid assets, and holdings in the amount of $4.6 million to her granddaughter. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Then I felt their eyes burning into me. My father's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might crack. My mother blinked twice, as if her reflection in the polished table had betrayed her. My brother gave a bitter laugh. To her? My mother snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice the room in half. That must be a mistake. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. It's no mistake. Mrs. Whitfield was quite clear in her wishes. Every document is signed and sealed, and just like that, everything shifted. That night, I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed with message after message from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Cousins suddenly concerned, uncles who wanted to reconnect. It wasn't about me, it was about the money. But the worst came from my parents. At first, it was subtle. Phone calls, feigned affection, invitations to dinner where they spoke sweetly, pretending nothing had changed. I knew it wasn't real. It was bait. When I didn't play along, the tone shifted. You know that money was never meant for you, my father said over the phone one night, his voice low and venomous. Grandma was confused. Manipulated, probably. You're too young to manage something like this. I'm not a child, I said quietly, gripping the phone tighter. He chuckled darkly. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else. But don't forget, we built the life you're standing on. And then came the smear campaign. At family gatherings, whispers spread like wildfire. Relatives cornered me, asking if I'd pressured Grandma, if I'd taken advantage of her weakened state. At church, I felt eyes on me, judgment in hushed tones. Even neighbors began pulling away, poisoned by the rumors my parents carefully seeded. I started losing sleep. Nights were spent staring at the ceiling, hearing their voices in my head, their laughter, their accusations. My body carried the stress. I dropped weight. My hands shook at random, and I felt like I was unraveling from the inside out. But then, an unexpected spark. One evening, I got a call from Mrs. Caldwell, the woman who'd lived next to Grandma for 20 years. She invited me over for tea. When I arrived, she handed me a small envelope, yellowed at the edges. Your grandmother left this with me, in case things turned ugly. Inside was a handwritten letter. Grandma's looping script filled the page. They will come for you, because control is all they know. But remember, my dear, you are stronger than their voices. This is not about money. It is about truth. Hold on to it. Tears blurred the ink as I read it again and again. For the first time since the will reading, I felt something other than fear. I felt chosen. Not for wealth, but for trust. That night, when my parents called again, this time threatening lawyers and court dates, I listened in silence, their words crashing like waves. But deep inside, something had shifted, because Grandma's voice was louder than theirs now. And as I hung up, I whispered to myself, I'm not alone in this. Not anymore. The first summons arrived on a gray morning. Rain streaked down my kitchen window, tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, and there it was. My parents were suing me. The claim? Undue influence. They accused me of manipulating Grandma, of taking advantage of her weakened state of mind. Reading those words felt like a knife twisting deep. Not only were they calling me a thief, they were dragging Grandma's memory through the mud. When I showed up to the first hearing, the air felt heavier than any courtroom I'd ever been in. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, the low murmur of voices, it all pressed down on me. My parents sat smugly with their attorney, dressed sharp and confident, whispering to each other as if victory was inevitable. My mother didn't even glance at me. My father wore a faint smirk, like he'd already buried me. For a moment, I believed them. I felt like the kid again, the one they ignored at the barbecue, the one who never measured up. My palms sweated, my breath came shallow. But then I remembered Grandma's letter. Her words burned in my chest like a shield. This is not about money. It is about truth. I raised my chin. The judge asked for opening arguments, and my parents' lawyer stood with a rehearsed gravitas. This young woman manipulated her grandmother in her final days. She twisted affection into influence, securing a fortune that rightfully belongs to my clients. Gasps rippled through the benches. My stomach dropped. They were painting me as a villain. When it was my turn, I stood shakily, but with every word, my voice steadied. My grandmother was not confused. She was not manipulated. She was sharper than anyone in this room gives her credit for. And she made her choice, because she saw me, not as a pawn, but as her legacy. I didn't drop the evidence yet. Not then. Instead, I let the silence hang, watched my parents squirm, their lawyer's jaw tighten. Afterward, in the hallway, my mother leaned close, her perfume sharp and suffocating. You think you're clever, but this money was never meant for you. We'll take it back, piece by piece if we have to. I stared into her eyes, calm for the first time. It's not about the money. It's about Grandma, and you're going to lose. Her face cracked for the briefest second before she stormed off. That night, I opened the box Grandma had left in her attic, the one I hadn't dared to go through yet. Inside were journals, letters, and, most importantly, documents. Receipts, deeds, even a notarized letter stating in her own words why she left the inheritance to me. She had seen my parents' greed, their neglect, and she refused to let them control one more thing after she was gone. Holding those papers in my hands, I felt the scales tip. My parents had power, money, reputation. But I had something they didn't: truth. And truth was heavier than gold. Still, instead of backing down, they doubled down. Rumors spread faster. Neighbors avoided me. Relatives cut ties. Anonymous letters slid under my door. At night, I sometimes caught the shadow of a car idling across the street. They wanted me scared. But fear was no longer the loudest voice in my head. Grandma's was. They thought they still had control. They didn't. The weeks that followed felt like living in the center of a storm. Every time I thought it couldn't get worse, another wave came crashing down. It started with whispers at church. Mrs. Dempsey, who had once hugged me after every service, suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. At the grocery store, people turned their carts the other way. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years posted on social media that some people don't deserve what they steal. The comment section lit up like wildfire. Neighbors, old friends, even coworkers joining in. My parents were pulling strings everywhere. They had money, connections, charm. And me? I was left looking like the greedy villain in a story I hadn't written. The stress crawled into my body. Nights became endless loops of tossing in sweat-damp sheets. My appetite vanished. My hands trembled so badly one morning, I dropped a mug and watched it shatter into white porcelain shards across the kitchen tile. For a moment, I almost felt like I was shattering too. But then, I remembered the piggy bank. I went to Grandma's house, the one I had inherited along with her estate. The air was heavy with cedar and dust, but her presence lingered in every creak of the floorboards. On the mantel sat the old piggy bank, its roses faded, a hairline crack running along the side. I picked it up and turned it in my hands. Small things add up. That was her lesson. And I realized that was my strategy. I couldn't fight my parents by shouting louder. I had to fight them by building piece by piece quietly until the weight of my truth crushed their lies. So I started documenting everything, every phone call, every voicemail, every threatening message slipped into my mailbox. I saved screenshots of social media posts, even the ones that vanished within hours. I collected receipts, bank statements, notarized letters from Grandma's journals. I visited her old friends and neighbors, asking for written statements of what they'd witnessed over the years. People who had seen my parents berate her, pressure her, belittle her choices. Some were hesitant, but a few, like Mrs. Caldwell, stood by me without question. Slowly, my allies began to surface. My best friend, who offered me her couch on nights when the house felt haunted by tension. A local attorney who believed in my case enough to lower his fees. Even one of my cousins, who had once mocked me, confessed privately, "They've always treated you like dirt." Grandma knew what she was doing. Meanwhile, my parents grew more desperate. They staged family interventions where relatives cornered me, demanding I do the right thing and hand over the inheritance. My father filed additional complaints, hoping to drown me in legal fees. My mother spread stories that I had forged documents, that I was mentally unstable, but for the first time, their cruelty didn't break me. It fueled me. Every rumor, every betrayal, every cold shoulder became another coin in the piggy bank, proof, evidence, momentum. The cracks in their mask began to show. My father snapped at a family gathering when someone asked too many questions. My mother's polished charm faltered when a neighbor pushed back against her lies. Behind closed doors, their empire was crumbling, and I was ready. The day of reckoning was coming, faster than even they realized. As I locked the box of documents I had gathered, my hands no longer trembled. I looked at the piggy bank on the mantel, cracked but unbroken, and I whispered to the silence, "This ends soon." The final hearing felt like the air before a storm. Thick, buzzing, charged with something inevitable. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, relatives, neighbors, everyone who'd been whispering about me for months now sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to see if I would fall. My parents entered like royalty, their lawyer striding confidently at their side. My mother wore her pearls, her smile sharp as glass. My father adjusted his cufflinks as though this was just another performance, another room to control. I sat alone at my table, the box of documents beside me. My hands rested on its lid, steady. My heart was pounding, yes. But there was no tremor in me now. The trial stretched for hours. My parents' lawyer painted me as greedy, manipulative, unfit to manage an estate. Witnesses were called who repeated the lies they'd been fed. My mother even took the stand, voice trembling just enough to appear wounded. She spoke of a confused old woman and a granddaughter who turned her back on family. The crowd nodded, whispered, leaned in. For a moment it felt like the tide was against me, until it was my turn. I rose, box in hand, and walked slowly to the center of the room. The wood of the floor echoed with each step. I set the box down, opened it, and pulled out the first document. "This is my grandmother's notarized letter," I said, voice calm, steady. In her own words, she explains why she left everything to me. She describes years of watching my parents misuse her money, pressure her into decisions, and disregard her wishes. Gasps rippled through the gallery. I didn't stop. I laid out bank statements showing money my parents had borrowed from her, thousands that were never repaid. I presented letters from neighbors who had seen her cry after arguments with them. And finally, I held up the piggy bank. It looked small, fragile, cracked from years of use. "This," I said softly, "was my grandmother's reminder that small things matter." That proof adds up. Every coin she dropped in here was her way of saying, she believed in me when no one else did. And this, I set it down gently, is why I will not let her voice be erased. The silence that followed was electric. My parents' lawyer shifted uncomfortably. My father's smirk vanished. My mother's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing with no words to give. Then came the questions from the judge. Hard, pointed questions. My parents stumbled, contradicted themselves. Their polished image cracked under the weight of truth. My mother's voice rose, shrill, defensive. My father's temper flared, his mask slipping until the courtroom saw not victims, but manipulators. And then the final blow. Grandma's letter, read aloud in its entirety. Her words filled the room like a haunting, undeniable truth. By the time it ended, my parents weren't sitting tall anymore. My mother's hands shook against her pearls. My father's eyes darted to the floor. The judge leaned forward, voice firm. The evidence is clear. The inheritance stands as written. This case is dismissed. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen. Then the gavel struck, sharp as thunder. I turned to my parents. They looked smaller than I had ever seen them. Not towering figures of control, just two people, stripped of their masks. I leaned in just enough for them to hear me. I don't want apologies, I whispered. I want change. And I walked out, leaving their silence behind me. The weeks after the verdict felt like breathing fresh air after years in a sealed room. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch at the sound of my phone. There were no more threats, no more poisoned invitations. The silence from my parents was deafening, but it was a silence I welcomed. They had spent their entire lives using words as weapons. Now their voices carried no power over me. News spread quickly. The neighbors who once avoided me now watched from a distance, whispering in softer tones. Some relatives reached out, offering apologies wrapped in excuses. We didn't know the whole story. We were pressured. I listened politely, but the days of bending to keep peace were gone. One afternoon, I returned to Grandma's house, the place where it had all started. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight, and the old wooden floor creaked under my steps. On the mantel sat the piggy bank, still cracked, still holding the weight of her lesson. I decided it was time. With a small hammer, I tapped the porcelain gently. It fractured with a soft sound, spilling out a stream of coins and folded bills onto the table. They clinked and scattered, a mosaic of small sacrifices saved over years. I gathered them in my hands, tears welling. It wasn't the money, it was the proof. Proof that every small act, every quiet choice, every moment of patience had led here. Proof that I was never as invisible as my parents wanted me to believe. I placed the broken pieces of the piggy bank in a frame, sealing them behind glass. On the bottom, I wrote one word in careful ink: freedom. Meanwhile, my parents' world began to unravel. The whispers they had once controlled turned against them. Neighbors spoke openly about their greed. Family members distanced themselves, tired of being pawns in their schemes. My father's business contacts grew wary. My mother's social invitations dried up. They had fought to keep control, but in the end, their obsession with appearances left them exposed. And me? I began building something new. I moved into Grandma's house, not as a relic of the past, but as a foundation for the future. I turned one room into a study, lining the shelves with her journals, her recipes, her letters. Each page was a reminder that love outlasts lies. I found peace in small things, planting her favorite roses in the garden, cooking the meals she taught me, inviting friends over, who felt more like family than blood ever had. For the first time, I wasn't surviving. I was living. Yet, there was still a quiet ache. Losing my parents wasn't a victory. It was a truth I had to accept. Blood ties don't always mean love. Sometimes they mean chains, and sometimes breaking them is the only way to breathe. I stood one evening on the porch, watching the sun sink low, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. For the first time, I realized the ending wasn't bitter. It was clean. Grandma's voice echoed in my heart, steady as ever. This is not the end. It's the beginning. And I believed her. Have you ever faced betrayal from the people who were supposed to protect you? Maybe it wasn't about money. Maybe it was about respect, love, or the simple right to be seen. I know what it feels like to be dismissed, underestimated, even humiliated. And I also know the quiet strength it takes to rise anyway. So I'll ask you, how did you rise above it? What gave you the courage to claim your worth when others tried to take it away? Share your story below, because you never know who might need to hear it today. Remember this: worth isn't something they give you. It isn't something they can take away. Worth is something you claim for yourself, and once you claim it, no one can ever silence you again.